Good afternoon and God bless you. Welcome everyone who is present here in the church and all those of you who are joining us online, which is possible thanks to our parish media studio Lutheraneum. Today we have an exceptional situation because we are dealing with some technical problems with the internet connection. Therefore, I'm going to first address those joining us online. Ladies and gentlemen, don't be surprised if this transmission is interrupted. Our studio will record the entire debate, so if, God forbid, something should happen and the transmission is interrupted, be patient. After some time, the recording will be put online and you will be able to hear the entire debate afterwards. Now, I have a request to those who are present here in the church. If you need interpretation from or into English or Polish, make sure you grab a headset. Also, if you understand both languages but have some problems hearing what is being said because of the echo here in the church, you might want to get a headset because then you will hear the sound directly in your ear without the echo. Dear brothers and sisters, dear guests, it's my great pleasure to welcome you as the pastor in charge of the Holy Trinity Lutheran Parish in Warsaw. I would like to welcome you to this debate and already now invite you to the church service that will take place right afterwards at 7 p.m. This is the 8th debate in a series called Dawn Conversations, Europe, Church, Ecumenism. This trio is further expanded to include the words "in a day of instability," because this is the title of today's debate. Europe, Church, Ecumenism in a time of instability. Of course, I'm not going to take part in the debate and contribute to the subject, but I'm very grateful that our honored guests have accepted the invitation to take part in the debate. They represent very important organizations of European Christians. I would like to welcome them right now. Welcome Reverend Frank Dieter Fischbach, General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches. Welcome. Also joining us today is Bishop Father Manuel Enrique Barrios Prieto. from General Secretary of the Commission of Bishops' Conference of the United Union. Welcome. We will also hear Polish voices in this debate, although I'm sure they will include a European perspective as well. Father Piotr Mazurkiewicz, who serves as a priest in the Warsaw Archdiocese, is with us today. Welcome. And also Professor Tadeusz Zieliński, a professor of the Christian Academy of Theology in Warsaw. Welcome. Today's debate will be moderated by Dr. Dominika Kozłowska, who has come from Krakow. Dr. Kozłowska is president of the Znak Social Publishing Institute, as well as member of the board of the Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation. Welcome. An important role today will be played by interpreters, and let me introduce them as well. Marta Brudny and Maciej Zgondek will help us communicate this afternoon. Welcome. During this debate, there will be a chance for you, ladies and gentlemen, in the audience to ask questions to our panelists. And I say questions intentionally. We don't have much time, so we would ask you to ask questions rather than make your own statements. We want to ask as many questions and learn as much as we can from the experience of our panelists rather than speak on our own. Before you ask your question, please introduce yourself and say which language you are going to use. Of course, it is not an obligation to introduce yourself or your organization, but we would be very grateful if you did. Also, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you that we have received a very kind letter from the head of the Mazovian Voivodeship, Adam Struzik. It is not the first time that Mr. Struzik responds to our invitation. We are always very honored by his kind letters. Let me quote long sections of this letter because I believe it's a very interesting voice of a Polish self-government official who also represents Poland in the European Committee of the Regions. Mr. Struzik writes, the subject of today's debate, Europe, Church, Ecumenism in a time of instability, rightly expresses the challenge which the broadly understood community of churches has to face in a day and age of weakened political stability, uncertainty, and a time when values are being put in question and challenged. The participation of high-level representatives of organizations, of churches and religious associations testifies to the fact that church leaders are aware of Christians' responsibility for the spiritual dimension of European integration built through dialogue, social service, evangelism, and making sure that economic development and technological progress maintain its human dimension. In a day and age of instability, the Church of Christ has a special mission to build churches between minorities and majorities. Secular people circles and ecclesiastical churches. Society and politicians making decisions about the future of Europe. This mission also involves building bridges and finding right ways of cooperation between different cultures. We have to talk about it, and the voice of European churches represented through the excellent guests of this panel should be heard, respected, and taken into account by EU institutions. I would like to congratulate you, ladies and gentlemen, of this invaluable initiative which happens as which takes part during the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union, which reminds us that the process of integration between people should, apart from the economic and social dimension, also include the spiritual one. As member of the European Committee of the Regions, I highly value cooperation and exchange about the further integration process, which will lead Europeans towards permanent peace, well-being, and well-understood freedom. I would like to ask Reverend Gast to greet all participants of the debate and service on my behalf, and I wish you openness to the voice of the Holy Spirit when you talk about our shared goals. Also wish you courage and wisdom in fulfilling the mission which he has invited us to fulfill. We are very grateful to Mr. Struzik for his letter, for his greetings, and allow me that in my response, which I'm going to send to you, I also greet him on behalf of all of us. And now I would like to invite to the front first Dr. Dominika Kozłowska, who's going to moderate today's debate. I would also like to invite Reverend Frank Fischbach to the front, General Secretary of CEC, and Father Manuel Enrique Barrios Prieto, Secretary General of COMESE, Father Piotr Mazurkiewicz, and Professor Tadeusz Zieliński. Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing certain restrictions this afternoon because our time is limited. At 7 p.m. there will be an ecumenical service of the word, and also right after the debate there will be an unofficial part, and on so the time of our debate will be limited. Unfortunately, Father Mazurkiewicz will have to leave us as soon as 5:30 because of other obligations. So we're all the more grateful that you still found the time to come. That's why I will try, if possible, give you time, ladies and gentlemen, to ask questions to our panelists, but I cannot promise that you will have a chance to ask your questions to Father Mazurkiewicz, because, as I said, he will have to leave earlier. Our guests tonight represent institutions, the names of which we have probably heard about, but might not be certain what they do, because, as we know, we have the General Secretary from General Secretary of COMESE and the current General Secretary of CEC. Professor Father Mazurkiewicz used to be the Secretary General of COMESE in the past, so we have two temporal perspectives of this organization. We also have Professor Zieliński, who said that it's ancient history, but he used to serve as a politician, so when he speaks about politics, he's doing it not just as a theorist, but also as someone who practiced it in the past. Before we talk about COMESE and CEC, I would like to ask broad questions and ask you for a brief answer. How do you understand the word instability? As our title says, Church in time of instability. And from the perspectives of your current functions, do you perceive the current time as unstable, or is this instability a permanent part of the Western culture? I know it's a very broad question, but I would like to ask you to very briefly sketch your perspective, from your personal perspective and also the perspective of the position that you have in your organization. Is it really a time of high instability? Who would like to begin?
I can begin if you want. So, I think the title is well chosen. As was said at the beginning, is the Dome Talks series on Europe, Church, and Ecumenism. And it has been added now in a time of instability, as you're asking. I think that is what we are now. Instability, maybe uncertainty, is also another word, because a number of changes are taking place in our world that weren't expected just a few months, a few years ago. Mainly, we speak about the new administration in North America and the changes that are already taking place. And generally, these can be seen as geopolitical changes. So we're all asking ourselves now, what is the place of Europe in the future of the world? Is Europe going to be able to be an important player in the international scene or not? That's a question we're all asking ourselves. That is also based not only on the changes that are taking place in the new administration in North America and the United States, but also has to do with the place of Europe in the economic world. Is Europe still competitive? Is Europe still on a level to be able to deal on a more or less level basis with China, with the United States, if it's losing positions? So that's one of the questions. And another question that is important and is affecting our world and Europe in particular is the war in Ukraine. This war of invasion in Ukraine, what does this mean? What can be the consequences of this? Not only for Ukraine, not only for Europe, but also on our understanding of international relations, international law, and the respect for international law. So, as a brief introduction, and you asked us to be brief, I think we are living in a time of instability, or I would prefer uncertainty. We don't know what the future is going to be like.
So, the perspective of instability is extended by the perspective of uncertainty and challenges we are facing. Challenges to our security, but also economic challenges having to do with the development of new centers of global domination. And a Christian and spiritual perspective is also so challenged. Would Reverend Fischbach like to also respond to this question?
Yeah, I can only agree what Father Manuel has already said. Perhaps I would put it in that way also, that I think many people in this global world will have said, well, we do not know another time than on uncertainty. Yeah? Growing up in uncertainties, with a lot of difficulties. I think we in Europe, we had another part of life there for over decades. Myself, born in Western Germany, really grown up with this feeling and knowledge of, well, there is this, at the beginning, Western European and transatlantic security and togetherness and being felt like under a shelter and protected somehow. by this geopolitical togetherness. And I agree that I think, and what we discover now in these last weeks and months, that this comes to probably to a deep change, that we have to discuss, and we start to discuss already, what does it mean and what can it mean if Europe is somehow on its own and has to think about, well, how do we maneuver now with, on the one side, Russia and the policy of Russia, and on the other hand, the United States and other mighty, powerful countries. And that is something I think really new also to us and to also my generation. And that is something with which we have to deal, and which is this kind of uncertainty where we also do not have answers now already to give, but which we are into it and have to work on that.
Thank you very much. And as I understand, security, peace, and the geopolitical position of Europe between the US and Russia, and we could add yet another element, and that would be the Chinese influence on making the world order unstable. And Professor Zieliński is going to take the floor now. Yes, thank you very much. Of course, you could reflect on the reasons behind this change taking place right now in the public sphere, and there are many, and I would like to discuss just one of them. It is a very important change coming from the digitalization, and the internet is commonly available, especially in the democratic countries. And the availability of the internet means that you do not need to go to a gathering of your party members. You don't need to read newspapers. You don't need to watch TV, because you have your own device serving you profiled information, addressing your level of education, addressing your needs, your preferences, and you are being shaped by that communication that is being sent to you on your individual device. And this, of course, has impact on the state of democracy. You can give the example of Poland or Germany or the US. In Poland, we have reactivist, extreme anti-democratic movements developing. Right now, they are still hiding their true faces. And where is this coming from? This is coming from this availability of the internet, because many people were not active in the politics. And that changed because of that fast development of the internet. And what should we do now about it? Should we keep complaining about the development of the civilization and the availability of the internet? Of course not, because these aspects have some positive sides as well. But we need to educate. We need educational measures to persuade people, to attract people to the civic system of democratic values. And as I believe, in the core of these values are shared by Christians as well. And I think the churches have a very vital role to play in that, as for educating people so that they are more tolerant, so that we have more equality, so that no one is excluded in the society. Thank you. And now the same question goes to Father Professor Mazurkiewicz. I would like to refer to the last thing that was mentioned by Professor Zieliński. It is the process of democratization of the world after the collapse of the communism. So the number of democratic countries was increasing, but now recently the number of democratic countries has been decreasing. And in those countries that have been democratic for a long time, there is a crisis of democracies. And this is very important, and we should pay attention to that development. So we have fewer and fewer democratic countries, and the old democracies, they are losing quality. And now we are talking about the instability in Europe, also in church, because we do have instability in the church as well. We have that process of secularization. As a result of migration, we can also see that the religious structure of the European societies is changing. We have fewer Christians, fewer Catholics, and we have more and more Muslims. So the fact of secularization in this context, because the democracy used to be related to, well, Christianity was related to democracy, but now with the structure, the religious structure of the European society is changing, there is also impact on the quality of democracy. Thank you very much. A very important statement. So we have instability in the political world, but this has consequences for the churches as well, and that the link between democracy and the church and the process of undemocratization. And now we have that question about the role of institutions, because whatever is institutionalized starts playing the role of an institution, and that does pose a challenge in this difficult time, in political terms, in economic terms, in social terms. And now I would like to talk about churches in the European institutions. So what is the identity, what is the role of churches in the European institutions? And I am referring to the institutions that you represent, CEC and COMESA. So how do you represent the Christian churches within the European institutions? And I have now a few questions, so that we could maybe do some mapping of the challenges that we need to face. And of course, we'll have a great opportunity to find out more about the role of churches in the European institutions. So who do you represent? Who do CEC and COMESA represent? Do you represent the interests of the churches, or maybe the interests of Europe as such, as a common good? And what does that dialogue look like in practice? What are the parties to that dialogue? Is it a dialogue between the churches on the one side and then the institutions, on the European institutions on the other side, or maybe the structure is a different one? So could you, well, spill the tea and let us know more? Let's start with Reverend Fischbach.
Yeah, thank you very much. And perhaps I start and then you will also go on, because I think we are, COMESA and CEC, there very much in line and work very often very closely together. I would like to make 3 points about that. The first is, and that is very important until today, the dialogue of the churches which are represented today through the Conference of European Churches. The name in Brussels has changed over the times, but we keep it as it is now, has started already in the 50s, beginning of 60s last century. Why? Because the churches in that time observed, with the starting of the European community, what was the name at that time, that they discovered, well, here is something happening which might be really a blessing change in Europe after the first part of the 20th century, which was a century of war in Europe, which seems to be something about peace, which seems to be something crossing the borders of nationalism, which seems to be something about reconciliation, togetherness, working together. And that is why church leaders at that time, in the 50s and 60s, started to get into dialogue with the European institutions, then also later on with the European Parliament and so on, because they thought, we as churches, as we are also for peace, for reconciliation, looking for that in Europe, we should strengthen this in Europe. We should be part of it. We should try to shape it also, with which we can contribute to Europe. And I think, or not only I think, I know from our churches, from the Conference of European Churches, that still is the spirit of our work. How can we contribute to Europe in a way on the common good, on the living together, on peace in Europe. And when I say Conference of European Churches, just to mention it, it is 114 member churches from all over Europe. So starting with Armenian, going to Belgium, going to Scandinavian, going to south of Italy. So all over these churches together, Orthodox, Protestant, Anglican churches coming together in this Conference of European Churches. And long before, there was an article in the European treaties about a dialogue with the churches and religion. The churches started this dialogue, and we always had we made always the experience there where we bring in something into this dialogue. Then also the institutions, the Commission, the Parliament, and others are interested in this dialogue. It is perhaps today a little bit more difficult than it was decades ago, but I think it's nevertheless still the experience that there where we want to bring in something of experience, of expertise, then we go into this dialogue and we have this dialogue on the European level. There is today, but then also I finish, there is today an article in the European treaties about the dialogue with the churches and with religions. And we are happy and glad and thankful that this article exists. But our dialogue is not only about this article. It is really also about going to the institutions wherever we think we want to contribute to something which is in need, which is suitable for Europe, reaching out for the European good for all. Perhaps so far, for the moment.
Thank you very much. And now the perspective of ComMesse, and so the General Secretary. A voice over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't start thanking for this meeting that we're having today. One of the things that we do together with CEC is trying to have a meeting with the government of the country that has the presidency of the Commission of the Council of the European Union. And you know now it's Poland, and Poland has assumed this responsibility in a very difficult moment, as we were saying at the beginning. I liked very much what was said about the dangers of digitalization and what that implies for our democratic societies and for democracy in Europe. And we see the changes that are taking place in this. So apart from the threat of the United States and the new administration, apart from the threat of competitiveness in other actors in the international arena, we also have digitalization as a very big issue and the risk that it poses to democracy. And we're seeing these changes in Europe, in many countries, in Romania, in Poland was said as well, but we have changes in France, we have changes in Germany. So this is something that we have to, it's a big challenge also for the European Union. And as also Professor Mazowiecki said about this risk of secularization and the changes that are taking place in European society also through migration. It's a religious change as well. So I think this is really something that challenges us. ComMesse stands for the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union. So it's an official representation of the Catholic Church before the European Union. We represent officially the Catholic Church in the member states before the European institutions. And our mission is to monitor European policy making. So what are the policies that are being made? Try to contribute to them when we can. Because politics is not made in the air. Policymakers have to hear the stakeholders. So we try to also contribute when these policies are important for the Church, not the Church as institution, the Church for what we believe in. So we believe in human dignity, we believe in the family, we believe in the protection and the defense of life, we believe in solidarity. So all these policies that the European Union is bringing forth that in some way affect our lives and are of importance to the Church, we try to intervene, we try to monitor, we try to contribute. And then as Professor Frank Dieter, Reverend Frank Dieter was saying, we also have a role of, there is now this article in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, Article 17, that establishes this obligation for a dialogue between the churches and the European Union. And that facilitates a bit of work, because we don't have to insist in having this dialogue has to take place. The way it takes place depends. Sometimes the people that are responsible for this, the implementation of this article in the European institutions, want to do it. Sometimes they're a bit more hesitant. So it's also our duty to try to enforce the implementation of this article. So that's a bit our role. In Europe, there are two institutions of the Catholic Church. There is the Council of Bishops' Conference of Europe, which represents all Europe, and it's more a pastoral entity of the Catholic Church. And then there's COMECE, which is an entity of the Catholic Church represented, in which the Bishops' Conference of the European Union are represented, and we have the function of having a dialogue with the institutions. That is our role.
It sounds very consistent and elegant. However, in practice, first of all, even within the Roman Catholic Church, not to mention the broader community of other churches represented by CEC, so the voices and perspectives ranging from the Anglican tradition to Orthodox tradition. But in the Roman Catholic tradition alone, when you hear different perspective from different national bishops' conferences, you will see differences. You will hear different statements made by the Polish Bishops' Conference and the German Bishops' Conference, for example, and visions about how Church should reform itself and function also differ from country to country. So it sounds very elegant and consistent, but in practice it seems to me that it is a number of very different voices. In principle, we agree that family is a fundamental value and that policies should aim at supporting families and treat them as the basic environment in which people are born and grow up. Hence, it deserves special protections from state. But if you go into detail and ask, for example, for a definition of what family is, you will see different perspectives and also frictions between different states' opinions, different legislations. Now I would like to pose my next question to Father Mazurkiewicz. I'm interested in your experience in dealing with these two orders, so to say. In one order, there is a dialogue between the European Union and Catholic Bishops' Conferences expected to speak in one voice. And then the pathway to finding that single voice that is then represented by COMECE. So how is this single voice found, or does COMECE always represent a very broad perspective on different issues? What is your experience, practical experience from your past, and also theoretical take, because you are also a scientist? Well, I think it boils down to the question what dialogue is about. Dialogue is not necessarily about theology, not necessarily about church as such. There's different issues and differences between churches are not part of the dialogue between COMECE and the European Union. This dialogue is about the relations with the European Union. You mentioned two examples. However, note that European Union has no competences in the field of religion, has no competence in issues of the family. However, as regards combating violence, for example, we remember the convention that's supposed to be adopted, and I don't know if Keck and Kommesser were involved in the in the process of consultations before the convention on counteracting violence in families was addressed. Well, on the one hand, we have competence of the European Union as they are described in the treaties. On the other hand, there is politics and policies which sometimes tend not to remember what the treaties say. So when we talk about issues that are within the competences of the European Union, in a way, you go beyond, so to say. Let me give an example. Education in the past. So member states reserved the right to take all the decisions regarding education on a national level. However, there was a position of a commissioner for education. So obviously, it was a function that was beyond the scope of competences of the EU. It was possible because education was also perceived as a service, educational services. And services is something where the European Union has competences. So when we look at specific examples, it was very rare that Keck or Kommesser acted in the interest of their churches only. For example, let's say the regulation on the protection of personal data, GDPR. Of course, it did affect the interest of churches. So sometimes, yes, we act on behalf of the churches, but in general, we are supposed to work for the common good, and church is seen as an entity expected to act for the common good. Let me give next example. John Paul II. Oh, and by the way, this case is not just about the EU, but the world of politics. John Paul II used to say that a democracy without values can turn very easily into overt or covert totalitarianism. Pope Benedict, probably because he was referring to a German tradition, used to say, if the church disappears from the public sphere as a public authority, which has a chance to speak about good and evil in politics, then by necessity a state becomes a totalitarian state. After the Second World War, this function was directly played by churches in Germany. So they were, in a way, a public conscience of the state, making sure that democracy does not turn into a completely different system. So the role of a public conscience is something much more important than focusing on individual issues or details. What's also worth noting in this context, it was said that representations of churches were prepared for dialogue, had been prepared for dialogue, actually, and so the churches had been prepared for dialogue with the EU long before Article 17 was introduced. Article 17 put the obligation on the European Union to enter into that dialogue, but the churches had been prepared before. So it's interesting, why did the EU decide to put the obligation on its institutions to dialogue with churches? Thank you very much. I would like to ask for an additional perspective to maybe close this part and have a full spectrum of perspectives. My next question goes to Professor Zieliński, who is an active Christian involved in many areas, who also has a certain political experience. So, what's your perspective? Do you believe that Christian voices should be institutionalized in some way, or should Christians as individuals get involved into politics, and then because they operate in politics guided by their Christian conscience, they should shape our reality, whether in Polish national politics or on the EU level? What's your take on this matter? Are you happy that your church is represented in CEC? Let me begin by saying that I wrote a review on a doctoral thesis written at the Karol Wyszyński University. The subject of the thesis was Comece. It was a doctorate written in the Faculty of Law, and actually said a lot and quoted Father Mazurkiewicz a lot. My review was very positive, but maybe it's a political analysis or a perspective of the political science. And I wondered how different bodies find a way to speak in one voice in a situation where sometimes differences between churches in viewing certain phenomena tend to be radically different. And of course, this is the so-called political kitchen, and not especially in a situation where sometimes the official position of a church can be very different than the position of individual Christians. So in the European Parliament, we had a chance to hear a Polish politician, a Catholic, and after what he said, he was banned from Parliament for several weeks. So his perspective is anti-Semitic. He became notorious for extinguishing the menorah in the Polish Parliament with a fire extinguisher. Of course, he does not represent the official position of the church, and yet there are many Christians whose position differ from the official position. There are many politicians who claim and use religious arguments in political debates to push forward their agenda, even if it goes against the official position of the church, and there is no reaction from the church. So my question was how to interpret the silence of churches when faced by such behaviors, and these behaviors they make publicity, and people hear about them much more than they hear about the official dialogue between church officials in offices. Now, dialogue. I'm quite skeptical when I hear the statement that churches are or should be or should serve as the conscience of either the individual states or the European Union, because I think we need much more than that. In our societies, there are many people, individuals, who are not Christians, and their conscience seems to be much more evolved than that of some Christians. Christians, they tend to be on a higher moral level. Why should not they be considered the churches? And if the churches are a conscience, is this a clear conscience? So when did churches actually adopt the democratic ethos? What was their take on democracy early on? Of course, we should not make the mistake of applying today's standards to judge events of the past. However, we do have the right to have a certain view on the history of church, and in many cases the churches were the last to adopt some democratic values. And there is another phenomena European or democratic or civic values are being challenged, including by religious groups. An example from America, the current president. We know that in the Oval Office, he takes the pose of a person who's praying. Is he really praying? We don't know, but he uses religious symbols to justify his actions, which are extremely anti-democratic and against the American legal order, which used to be seen for many years as a benchmark or a point of reference for us, and now it's disappearing overnight. I do hope that the Americans will do something about it. I don't know. So Christians are represented in the European Union. However, I do hope that it's not just those Christians that behave like Grzegorz Braun, because there are many parliamentarians who are very moral, who are Christians, but they not necessarily wear Christian symbols or crosses as their lapel pins. And sometimes they are more Christian in their behaviors than those that bring Christian symbols into the parliament. Unfortunately, Father Mazurkiewicz will have to leave us soon. So before you go, would you like to maybe say something or add something or respond to what has been said already? Yes, yes. I just wanted to provoke a little bit because, well, if we look at politics, the question is whether the church as an institution should be an institution that says specifically what politicians should do when they take certain political decisions. In the Catholic Church, we say that every person should act under the power of the sacrament of baptism. So what does when they act under the sacrament of baptism, it means that they act on their own responsibility, but it also means that the Church approves political pluralism. It accepts that in Parliament different opinions and different positions may be expressed, and Catholics do not have to be members of just one political party. Of course, there may be some extreme cases, much like the example mentioned by Professor Zieliński, and then we have to ask how to view these extremes and whether. So do we expect just political authority, so someone, the President of the Parliament, to react, or should the Church respond in a way? In the Polish debate, we've seen it several times. The Catholic Bishops' Conference felt that they have to publish a statement, for example, on patriotism and on the difference between being patriotic or nationalistic. I know that the meaning of nationalism in English is slightly less dangerous than the word in Poland, but I do hope you know what I mean. And there was a large debate in Poland, and in the end, the Church said that the role of this statement was not to call the society to order, but just to remind society what the Catholic doctrine on that issue was. And I think this is essential, so that the Church decides that lay people, when they operate in politics, they do it under their own responsibility and do not represent the Church. And as regards what happens in the background, in the so-called political kitchen, And it has, I think, something to do with what we discuss at COMESA. So we don't discuss all the issues that are discussed in White Church, but I was quite inspired after meeting with CEC, because my impression was, I'm not sure I was correct in my impression, but my impression was that if CEC, despite a huge variety and diversity of member churches, is able to work out a single position, this position is also very close to our position. So if Protestant churches and Orthodox churches can find a common shared opinion, it is also very close to the Catholic opinion. That's why I think very fondly of the years of collaboration with CEC, and I'm very grateful for this time, because it was very frequent that we went hand in hand as representatives of two organizations and were able and to represent a shared statement in our exchanges with the European Union. And I have to apologize deeply that I have to leave early. It's just I have to stand behind the altar at my church at 6 because we are having church retreat, and it was a previous obligation. So I'm very sorry, but I have to say goodbye.
To add one thought about this question of a single voice of a church or the churches, because I'm also not, also from my experience now, not absolutely sure that it is always this that we have a single voice on something. And I will give you immediately now an example which is just for our debate. We will have in Europe now in our churches a debate about defense policy, military, what does it mean to establish security in Europe. And I'm pretty sure that we will have different opinions in our churches about it. We have churches which come from a tradition of pacifism, very close to this. We have churches which come more from a tradition of preparedness, to say, well, yes, we have to be prepared for the case that somebody is trying to invade us, the country, and different others. And they are all theologically reflected. It is not so that one can say, oh, this one is wrong and this one is the right one. But I think, nevertheless, it is a service of the churches when they start this debate, theologically, but also to the reality which we observe in Europe, and bring in this discussion into the public sphere and our public discussion also, as churches who are also listening to each other, who gets also the arguments from others, because the democracy for the moment is also in danger, because we forget sometimes to listen to each other, to look only to our own arguments, also on our digital devices, yes? And church can be a place where arguments are really exchanged to the point where it is about. And the question of peace is, of course, one which is absolutely essential for us. And I think that our churches there can play a role in the way how we discuss it, and all knowing that we have not this easy single answer to what we observe now. Who could say in this moment in Europe and in the world that we have this one easy answer how to stay in peace in the situation in which we are? And I think that is something which we could have in mind, and where really we as churches can contribute to in Europe, and which in the way we discuss things and we bring in our arguments and also the aim, building peace, building reconciliation, is something where we serve not only ourselves, but really the people and the continent here in Europe.
Your statement opens the following discussion, and I wanted to ask about that. There is tension between this moral voice of the Church, prophetic voice, like we need reconciliation, we need peace. This is something that can hardly be questioned. But on the other hand, we have pragmatism, the political realism. So the political world is as it is. And with many questions of great importance, like migration nowadays, or asylum, or security here in Europe, like we need to make sure that people in Europe feel safe, and then we have peace on the other side. So maybe we need armaments to be able to ensure peace. So that tension between this moral prophetic voice of the Bible, of the churches and Christians, and on the other hand we are all involved in the political realism, and there is tension between these two sides, and sometimes we need pragmatic solutions that might seem far away from the moral evangelical ideal that we would like to strive for. So how can we deal with that tension as Christians? How can we solve this problem, especially in this situation when we as Christians speak an institutional voice? So should we speak the language of political compromises, even though this might be far away from that prophetic moral voice, or maybe not? Who would like to take the floor? Professor Liński? Well, this statement is very elegant, as you've made it, the prophetic voice. And there is also a very similar statement that is self-flattering as well, as self-flattering terms, churches as conscience. So we as churches believe that we have a clear conscience, and that's something that gives us the right to teach other people, to preach. And you put it, in other words, prophetic voice, that's what you said. So this is the prophetic language, indeed. And there are some rules applicable to that. But there are some churches doing that, and very successfully so. And there are churches that need to embark on an internal discussion about what they believe in. I don't mean the fundamental beliefs, but not necessarily values, like how you treat women, how you treat children, how do you treat people that have a different religion, have a different skin color. And it was some years ago, and I got involved in a Facebook forum. I didn't want to do that, but at some point I did that, and that was at a time when, after 2015, the basis of democracy started being questioned in Poland, and I saw how many religious people openly questioned what Christianity is really about. And today, when we have the threats related to migration, and that is a problem that needs to be solved, in the internet you have a lot of hate speech, not just towards the migrants, but just towards other nations. We have politicians on the German-Polish border who want to construct a wall on the Polish-German border. It is about the relocation of migrants. That's why they want to construct that wall. But this all should result in antagonizing us. And how do churches react in all these spheres? And then science, knowledge, medical achievements. We have that whole movement against vaccinations. So the churches could play a very positive role in all of that. But first, we need to have that internal discussion. Before we can speak a prophetic voice, we need to work out something valuable within an internal discussion. And within the individual churches, these voices may differ from one another as well. And sometimes there are some perspectives that can't even be accepted, and yet they are the majority ones in some churches. And of course, the values are changing in all spheres of life, and the churches, they have very high aspirations in moral terms. So if our aspirations in moral terms are so high, we should feel really obliged to be the first ones to discuss all these problems internally. Reverend Barrios Prieto, it's over to you.
Yes, well, a lot of things have been said on many issues, but I'm going to return to your last question about realism and prophetic voice. But I wanted to say a few things that I think are important for our consideration and our reflection of what has come out this afternoon. On the issue of differences inside the churches, for example, this was put forward also by Reverend Frank Dieter. I think this is a very important issue, that to speak with one only voice, but we have also divisions inside our churches. Sometimes when I think of Keck putting together the Orthodox, the Anglican and the Lutheran tradition is quite difficult, I think, in many issues. But also the Catholic Church, sometimes we have differences between bishops' conferences, as was said. As also was said by Professor Masłowkiewicz, I think it's important that we keep as COMECE to what are the European competences, because that's our role, a dialogue with the European institutions. And the European institutions, the European Union can decide on some things on which the member states have conceded some of their sovereignty. And in other things, there are national competences which we have to respect the national sphere. It is true that sometimes we have to say also for ideological reasons, the European Union wants to also invade competences that are national competences, for example, on family and other things. But we have to maintain what is that difference? What can the European Union decide and what it cannot decide? So also on issues that the European Union can decide, there is a difference also inside the Catholic Church on some of these issues. For example, on migration and asylum, we have different sensibilities in the bishops' conferences. On peace and war, we also have differences. It's different when we hear bishops also in our plenary assemblies of COMECE that come from Romania, come from Poland, come from the Baltic countries when they speak about Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, that bishops that come from maybe Germany or France, even Spain, they see it sometimes in a different way. So I think what is important, and it's also been said, that we are very frank when we have our discussions in our plenary assemblies, and all the bishops can speak and express their opinion. And when we have to put forward a statement, for example, on the war in Ukraine, as we did recently, or some other statement that is signed by all the bishops, we agree on a position, even if it takes time. Even if sometimes some of the bishops' conference might not sign that document very willingly, but it's a common position that we have arrived on an issue that is important, which might be migration, asylum, might be the arms and rearming Europe, might be the issue of due diligence, might be the question of, now there's been a recent question about the returns in migration, so that's a very big question, and what the churches have to say on this. So I think it's important that as churches and as bishop conferences, thinking about the Catholic Church, we hear each other and we arrive to a common position. And then as Catholic Church, we have an advantage. We have the Pope. We have the voice of the Pope, which is the voice of the successor of Peter. And that is also one of the functions of the successor of Peter, is to create unity. It's a mission of unity. So this also in some way helps us when we have to make a statement or we have to take a position on an issue that is debated and is important for the Church and for the European citizens. And now the last thing that was said, prophetism and reality. I always see this issue in different levels. I think as pastors of the church, as bishops, as priests, we have a role of orientation, of giving orientation on the things that are debated. But then the politicians are the ones that have to do the policies. And in this, they have their legitimate autonomy to act. And as Father Piotr was saying, Catholics are baptized, and we have as baptized a mission in the world. So there is, even if bishops give an orientation on some policies, then the Catholic politicians that vote the laws have their autonomy, have their conscience to do what is better. And I think that is a space that has to be respected also by pastors and by priests. It's the role of the lay people. So that would be my general answer. So the Pope has a prophetic voice, the priest has to have a prophetic voice of guiding. The politician has to hear his conscience, hear what the orientations of the church, and try to work for the common good and the good of humanity.
And Reverend Fischbach, would you like to refer to this?
I think the discussion just can go on because it's very, very interesting, of course. Perhaps just to add also, if we are on the reel of democracy, I think it's also important that democracy is about arguments, exchange of arguments. If it is arguments by the churches or arguments by the trade unions or by a person, individual person, whoever, it is about the discussion of listening, hearing, making arguments and getting it and to find a way what seems to be the best way to proceed. That's also why, and perhaps it's a little bit, not an answer, but echoing what you have described as a challenge also to the churches, that in the Conference of European Churches we have in the last years adopted a way to think about that we should promote something like public theology. Public theology means, yes, we are theologians, we are coming from the church, we are grounded in the Bible and in our churches and church traditions, but we know that this is not self-understanding. But we have to say, what does it mean for the reality of the reality, really, in which the people live, in which we all live, and the society, and we meet. And we meet on the, let's say also in Brussels, we meet in the public space to discuss issues and things. And we are a part of it. And we come from a certain tradition, we come from certain also faith, and we don't want to give it up, not at all, but we think that from this ground and from our faith we can contribute to this discussion and to these reality which we are facing. And that's why we think about this public theology, which means it is not in the first immediately a prophetic voice saying, well, you have to do this or you have to do that, but it is a kind of orientational argumentation to get into a discussion which means democracy. Yeah, and I think that is the place and also the role we have to play.
Thank you very much. I have to admit that I'd really love to ask more deeply about the consequences of this statement, because I also see democracy as a space of arguing and looking for the best solutions. But on the other hand, the question about the strong voice that represents certain moral argument and saying that this moral position goes beyond any discussion because it is something on a higher level. So the question is, where should church be in this setting? Where should Christians be? Which voice should they speak on the issues they want to get involved in? So I do experience a sort of dilemma, and I think the same dilemma may be shared not only by institutions but also by individual people who have to say something in public. I know that Professor Zieliński wanted to comment, and then I will open up the discussion to the audience. I know that we have to finish this panel in this form, so I would like to invoke Martin Luther King, not Martin Luther we can see represented in his church. However, he also can be seen as the father of freedom, because thanks to his Reformation, people were free to express their faith as they believe it. But I want to invoke Martin Luther King. As an American preacher, he'd probably have a lot to say to President Donald Trump, and he said that churches should be like an AC, air conditioner. What does an air conditioner do? It is placed somewhere between the insides of the building and the external world, and it sucks in air from the outside and adjusts the temperature. And what King meant was that churches can play such a useful, I don't want to say saving, but a useful role as air conditioners, because they take the temperature of the social relations or public debate that is on the outside and somehow adjust it to turn it into acceptable or bearable social relations. Of course, they are not efficient enough as these air conditioners to change everything in society. And Pope Benedict said rightly that Christians should prepare to become minority, but in terms of quality, they can still be significant. So this air conditioner can play a considerable role and be beneficial to the society. So what is bearable temperature then? Churches can refer to stable values that have proven themselves over time, but of course we need a sort of verification and debate about what these values are, because over the centuries, every now and then churches would preach some dangerous content as well. So it will take a lot of work, but I think churches may become irreplaceable as those who stand before the present day and the past, because they have a long-term perspective, not like parliamentarians or politicians, which only have one electoral cycle. Churches are here over centuries. So because they have this long-term perspective, they can behave differently. They don't have to act in a hurry. They can think, they can be reflective, they can maybe re-evaluate, to think again which values are the most important ones, and then as air conditioning or similar to air conditioning give a certain proposition to society. Thank you. Now I would like to open up the debate to the audience. I know that Reverend Meckel has a question. There are 4 other people, so we have 4 questions.
A good reason is churches to be very modest in Europe, because very often we as churches were not really the front runner for democracy and human rights. We are very often more the resource of tensions than for peace. And so my question is, are there concrete projects, for instance, for CEC, to diminish tensions between churches, to diminish resources of tensions, or even more, where churches play a not so good role for reconciliation? I know there are other examples of reconciliation if we see the letter of the Polish bishops 30, 60 years ago, or the Ostdenkschrift, or Corrimela in Northern Ireland. There are some, but in general, I would say the most point should be to diminish the own tensions.
Dziękuję bardzo i proszę o następny głos, pytanie. Tutaj.
Thank you. Next question.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Grzegorz Konbicki. I live in Warsaw. I'm a Roman Catholic. I've been listening to your debate, and I often had to look at the picture showing the ruins of this church. It was made during the Second World War. A couple of streets away from here, there was the Warsaw Ghetto. And my question is, because I don't want to dive deep into my own reflections, but ask a question instead. So, in the current situation, are we not dealing with a situation that our governments are taking over the nationalist rhetorics because they see how powerful it is? Nationalism sells very well right now. And this is expressed by limiting the right to asylum at the Polish-Belarusian border. So what is your opinion? Maybe I'm wrong in my surmise. Should Christians, regardless of confession, be very clear in interpreting the Bible, and when something is black, they should call it out and it's black or white? And if the Bible said love thy neighbor, should it not be absolute? Do we even have a right to relativize it, to say we can be relativistic about it and it does not apply always? Because I do believe that the reason behind the instability we are facing is relativism. And this is the real reason, not war, because wars have always been there. Thank you. Dorota Kutyła is my name. The way I understand this discussion and its topic is that the instability is somewhere outside, beyond the church, and Christianity can be a source of stability. However, my experience of a decade of intensive prayer, because God has led me to different churches in Warsaw, and this decade of praying has led me to the conclusion that also church is a source of instability. And the institutional church tends to blame the church members, saying that the believers, they come and go, but the church persists. So my question would be about your perspective of the condition of European churches, of Christian churches. Przemysław Florianowicz-Błachut, Lutheran member of this congregation. I have a question about one specific issue, but it is connected to the ongoing war in Ukraine, and also issues of defense and defensive potential of Europe. In many countries, people go back to the issue of obligatory conscription or obligatory military service. This debate is starting in Germany, I know. And today, the Synod of the Evangelical Church of Berlin and Brandenburg is ending today, and during this synod, a statement was made opposing the idea to introduce obligatory military service in Germany, supporting a voluntary military service. and a solution that would also include and respect conscientious objectors, so those people who, for religious reasons, are not prepared to take guns, weapons into their head. So not necessarily just Jehovah's Witnesses or radical members of evangelical churches, but I think also in mainline churches such as Lutheran Church, there might be individuals who will invoke and quote the gospel, saying, "Who fights by sword will die by sword," might object to fighting. So this issue is not harmonized by EU law. The European Union does not have the competence to introduce any central solution in this regard. But would it be possible for CEC or COMESE to take a position or issue a statement in this debate to make this voice maybe stronger, to touch the consciences of European politicians? Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask the panelists to respond to those 4 questions. Why don't we begin from Father Manuel?
Yes, though there was a question very directed to Frank Dieter on the churches. But I agree with most of what has been said by you. On the churches needing to be humble, I think that is obvious. We are in a time where, as churches, we're more called to be witnesses and not to speak with an authority, speaking in a too authoritarian way or too moralistic way. That I don't think is now the mission of the church. So I agree perfectly. The church has to be humble. The churches have to be humble. On the ghetto of Warszawie, nationalism, I also agree with you. It's very strange how some things in the gospel, we see them very clear. But for other Christians, sometimes they are not so clear. This is an issue that we find. And for loving your neighbor, that's a very clear thing. So I agree with you in this. And I think this thing we're living in Europe of populism, of nationalism, is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. And it goes against the founding values of Europe. Nationalism, extreme nationalism, is what brought wars in Europe. And the European Union was founded to be a project of peace, to overcome those tendencies. So I think that's something that we have to always keep in mind. I was very impressed by what was said, the third intervention on the churches being also cause of instability. And yes, possibly it's right. I think in the Catholic Church we have had an experience in these last years about a synod that we celebrated, which this synod on synodality had and has this mission of another way of being church, a synodal church, a church in which we hear each other, a church in which we overcome accepting our differences, but we walk towards a unity in diversity, as also the European Union should be. So I also agree with this. And on the last question of military service, on peace, this is also a big question. I don't know if in COMESE CEC we could agree on a statement on this. We are working very much on the issue of peace in COMESE. We're living a difficult time in Europe. We are by ourselves, also in defense and security. Europe has to be able, I think, to defend itself and to show to the others that we can defend ourselves. But I don't think we can forget, as Christians and as also Europeans, that our goal is not war. Our goal is peace.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. Reverend Fischbach.
Yes, thank you for the questions and comments. I don't think that I can answer them all, but perhaps just give one or two ideas also from my side. First of all, thank you very much and being with us, Mr. Merkel, to be with us and with this question. First of all, one could really say that the Conference of European Churches is a little bit of this platform of dialogue and coming together from very different ends also and traditions, and to bring churches and representatives of these churches together to discuss on certain issues, and also sometimes not getting to one single opinion afterwards, but at least to have a forum of coming together and exchanging, and this is already something meaningful also as such. I think I observed this also in our relation with the Ukrainian churches also, where we, and also together with CPCE, trying to bring them all together in dialogue with us and also with the European institutions in Brussels, so that we walk together in a certain way, although they themselves have also their conflicts and discussions between them. And I think these ecumenical encounters help indeed to discuss issues in a more peaceful and open way and to go forward together. I think there is something where we can indeed contribute also today in Europe to this. Regarding peace, perhaps just also to add, I think for the moment in the situation which we are, it is not about the one statement perhaps to do. One thing is clear, that I think we stay and ask for conscious objection, that this is a human right, for countries, for people in the countries, which must be considered and must be in place. But for instance, we had last December a European conference here in Warsaw on the question of just peace. What does it mean for our churches today in Europe? And we had several guests also and participants from Ukraine, from different churches of Ukraine in this conference here in Warsaw, regarding reflecting the war against Ukraine, and what does it mean now when we speak as churches about peace. And I think that is a way to do it, to be in a dialogue, to discuss it, and to go on this way forward, to understand it better, and what can we then really say about it? I think there I'm very much about the dialogue. Statements are also from time to time necessary, of course, but also only as a pathway to go on then in dialogue. That is how I would react perhaps on that.
Thank you very much. And the professor?
As for asylum and the obligatory military service, it was very difficult for me to observe what was happening on the border between Belarus and Poland. After 2015, there was this film by Agnieszka Holland, a famous director. The Border was the title of that film. And what was happening was horrible, and there were many Christians, people that were motivated by their faith, who helped people who were losing their lives on that border, in the mud, swamps on that border. And Lukashenko was responsible for organizing that phenomenon, and now Lukashenko is no longer able to get women and children to that border. Now it's mostly young men. So the structure of those people has changed. It used to be women and children as well. Now it's just young men. So I believe that the Republic of Poland has the right to defend itself from that phenomenon. For some time, we can't close our border forever, but now that we have that war in Ukraine, I think it's acceptable to take the measures that have been taken with regard to the border with Belarus. And now the other problem, because we've been talking about the border, the right to defend yourself, the obligation to protect your family and your house, the obligation to protect those who can't protect themselves, the women and children and people who are sick. So there is this obligation, and that obligation is grounded in the Bible as well. So we need to have an efficient army, and if there is a broad conflict, and there is a broad conflict right now, we need to increase the scale of recruiting soldiers. So this is my personal opinion. This might not apply to all the member states of the European Union, but in countries like Poland, I think it will be a good idea to have obligatory military service. Why? Because it is our tradition that young people are educated within the military service. So we can educate, we can discipline, teach people discipline when they join the military for that training. This might be trivial, you know, but I think that there is something about it, and the right to object. This is self-evident, but this is not about allowing people to refrain from joining the army just like that. They might say that they don't want to join the military, but instead they need to take up some other obligations towards the state. Because if you join the army, there are a lot of things that need to be done. It's not just about being an armed person using the arms as such. You might have other duties in the army, so if you're not okay with being trained as a soldier, you might agree to take, or you might be obliged to take up other obligations within the army. So we know we don't have borders in the EU, but it's not possible for us to give up our external borders. Our external borders, the external borders of the EU still exist, and let's hope that the European Union can be extended by new member states and there will be less need to use weapons of any kind. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our audience. I'd like to thank our guests today. Father Professor Piotr Mazurkiewicz, Reverend Manuel Enrique Barrios Prieto, Reverend Frank Dieter Fischbach, who is going to preach today during our ecumenical service of the word, and Professor Tadeusz Zieliński. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention, and would like to thank you for the moderation. And now we are going to start our ecumenical service.
And thank you to the interpreters as well. No?
Without them, we would have been lost.
So, I would like to thank the moderator, Ms. Kozłowska. Thank you very much. And let me just remind you, you can see that information in the invitations, on the posters. It has been the 8th debate that we've held today, and it was organized by the Polish Ecumenical Council, the 8th debate within the Dome Talks. It was organized also by KEK, by CONESA, the Polish Ecumenical Council, as already said, and we are very happy that once again our Holy Trinity Church has been part of it. But we also have our partner parishes, the Berlin one, the Evangelical Cathedral in Berlin, and the cathedral in Uppsala. So I'd like to thank our partners as well. So thank you very much for this part. I'd like to thank those who have been following us online. I've been watching the stream, and it was not interrupted as far as I was able to tell. So I'm very glad that the internet has worked well and that the stream was not interrupted after all. So whoever was following the debate online was able to do so without any problems. This debate will be available on our YouTube channel, Luteranie w Warszawie, so Lutherans in Warsaw. So you can watch it again. We've embarked on a very important discussion about very important issues within this 8th debate within the Dome Talks that take place at our Holy Trinity Church, and I hope that we will continue that debate in the time to come. and that this will have a very good result for Europe and for all our member churches in Europe. And now you are invited to join us in the underground of our church. A meal will be served, and you will be able to continue the discussion. And at 7 p.m., let's reconvene here in the main hall of our Holy Trinity Church, and there will be this ecumenical service of the Word. During that service, we will have leaders of different churches that are member of the Polish Ecumenical Council and the Catholic Church as well. The preacher will be Reverend Fischbach, and also there will be a statement by Bishop Mariano Crociata, and that service of the Word will be streamed online as well, so you can also join us for that service online. I'd like to thank the interpreters as well. Thank you very much who have helped us with communication, Ms. Marta Brudny and Mr. Maciej Zgondek. And let me also thank our volunteers that have been helping us and are going to continue helping us. Thank you very much, and see you soon.